Billionaire got hugged by mistake, but that poor girl awakened a love he never knew he needed. I hugged the wrong man at the airport. He turned out to be a billionaire. And by forever. The airport was chaos. Voices tangled in intercom static. Suitcases rolled like thunder across polished floors. Emily Lane stood still in the storm, her heart pounding. Her older brother was finally coming home. Her eyes scanned the crowd. And stopped. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, wearing the same coat from the photo he sent. He didn't think, she just ran. He weaved through the crowd, breath caught in her throat, her arms wrapped around him from behind in a trembling, desperate hug. "I missed you," she whispered. But something was wrong. The chest beneath her cheek was too still. And a scent, no trace of cheap cologne. Just something colder. Sharper. Expensive. He looked up. Storm-gray eyes stared back, a sculptured face from a magazine cover. Ooh, this man wasn't her brother. He got and flinched. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, "Oh," and smiled. The airport buzzed around her like a hive, departures and arrivals bleeding into each other under sterile fluorescent lights. Announcements crackled overhead. The scent of overbrewed coffee lingered in the air, mixed with jet fuel and hurry. Emily Lane stood alone, clutching a too-light coat and a paper sign that read, "Welcome home." Her breath hitched every few seconds as she craned her neck, eyes darting past travelers and luggage carts. It had been 7 months since she'd seen her brother. And everything in her life had fallen apart in that time. Their apartment rent was 3 weeks late. Her manager at the airport cafe was threatening to cut her hours again. And Oliver, her baby brother, had stopped mentioning the chest pain altogether, which worried her more than when he used to complain. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, all that mattered was finding him. Tall, broad-shouldered black winter coat, the one he'd promised to wear. He spotted him. Or thought she did. A silhouette ahead, black wool, familiar height, dark hair curling slightly at the collar, just like the blurry photo he'd sent her last week from a military base in New Jersey. Without thinking, Emily ran. The world narrowed to a single point as she reached him, her arms wrapped around his back in a trembling, breathless embrace. "I missed you," she whispered, pressing her cheek against the warmth of his coat. But something was wrong. The chest beneath her wasn't moving. No warmth, no shift. And the scent, no cheap aftershave, no familiar sweat and metal. Only cold leather, and cologne so sharp it made her eyes sting. She pulled back and froze. The man she had hugged wasn't her brother. He wasn't even close. This man, he looked like something out of a fashion billboard. Tall, stunningly dressed in tailored charcoal gray, with hair brushed back like it had never known disorder. His jawline was severe, his lips faintly curved, but it was his eyes that pinned her. Steel gray, amused and unreadable. Time paused. Then came the moment her entire body remembered to panic. "Oh my God," she stammered, stepping back so fast she nearly tripped. I thought you..." Still, the man said nothing. He simply raised a single eyebrow, his head tilting slightly, but with irritation, but something far more unsettling. Intrigue. "Well," he finally said, his voice smooth and low. "That was unexpected." Emily's face turned scarlet. "It was the reflection, I thought." "Emotionally nearsighted," he echoed. He bit her lip. When emotions are stronger than common sense, you see what you want to see. He didn't laugh, but the corners of his mouth twitched, like he was holding it in. That was when the security guard arrived, a brick wall of a man in black, scanning Emily as if she were a threat. "Mr. Carter, is everything okay?" Her heart dropped. Carter. Brian Carter. The name hit her like a punch. The billionaire CEO who kept his life out of headlines. The man whose tech company practically built the city's skyline. She had once seen his face on the cover of Forbes while waiting in line at the grocery store. And she had just tackled him in front of half the terminal. Emily turned and fled. He didn't stop until she reached the cafe where she worked, out of breath, cheeks burning. That night, after her shift ended and the airport began to quiet down, Emily scrubbed trays and mugs with trembling hands. It was supposed to be a good day. Her brother had called to say his bus was delayed, hours late, stuck in snow. The hug hadn't just been embarrassing. It had been misplaced hope. As she cleaned, she whispered apologies to the air, to her reflection in the cafe window, to the stranger who would probably never think about her again. But he would. Because the next morning, as the cafe opened and the first wave of groggy travelers wandered in, Brian Carter stepped through the glass doors. He wasn't wearing the same coat, but he wore the same expression, unreadable, curious, too calm for the chaos of the airport around him. He ordered coffee, black, and he asked very specifically for her to make it. Emily froze behind the counter. The mug, the look in his eyes wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was far more dangerous. It was interest. And that was the moment everything, her world, her heart, her plans to stay invisible, began to shift. Chapter 1. The sound of suitcase wheels and static-laced announcements filled the air, but Emily Lane heard none of it, only the pounding of her heart, each beat sounding like a countdown she hadn't agreed to. She stood near Gate 6 with a handmade cardboard sign pressed to her chest, the word "Welcome Home" scribbled in a rush between shifts. Her eyes scanned the crowd like a soldier searching for an ally. She was so close to falling apart, but not yet, not until she saw her brother. Please let him be here. And then, as if the universe had heard her, she spotted him, or thought she did. Black coat, tall frame, messy dark hair curled just slightly over the collar. The silhouette looked just like the photo he'd sent from base last week. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers clenched the sign. She didn't think, they ran. The crowd blurred around her as she slipped between travelers and rolling bags, tears already threatening to spill. She needed this hug more than she needed anything else in the world. Her arms wrapped around him from behind, the warmth of his coat familiar, almost. She pressed her cheek to his back, eyes fluttering shut. "I missed you," she whispered, voice shaking with relief. But something was wrong. The hug, his shoulders didn't relax. No comforting arm wrapped around her. His chest beneath her cheek was too still, too hard. The fabric was unfamiliar, sleek and smooth like money, not the coarse military cotton she knew. And the scent, no metal, no sweat, no worn cologne, just something expensive and cold. Sandalwood maybe, or arrogance. Her eyes opened. Slowly, like a horror film unspooling one frame at a time, she stepped around to face him. And froze. The man staring back at her was a stranger. Worse, he was devastatingly handsome, with storm gray eyes that could slice through glass, and a jawline sculpted by silent judgment. His dark suit fit too perfectly. His expression wasn't angry, just like she was some kind of puzzle. "Oh God," Emily gasped. She staggered backward, nearly knocking into a stroller. "I thought..." His brow lifted a fraction, clearly. "It wasn't I didn't mean to hug you. Not you. I was supposed to hug my brother." His mouth twitched. "Emotional nearsightedness," he repeated. Emily winced. "It's a thing I made up just now, when your heart sees what it wants before your brain has a chance to warn you." He tilted his head, eyes never leaving hers. That was when the security guard arrived, a tall man in black, with the build of someone who didn't smile often. "Mr. Carter, is everything okay?" Emily's stomach turned. "Carter. Brian Carter." The name hit like cold water. The billionaire behind Carter Holdings. The man whose company name was printed on half the gates in this airport. She had once seen his face in a Fortune magazine while eating cup noodles at home. He avoided interviews, didn't do social media, said to be ruthless in business and impossible to charm. And she had just hugged him like a long-lost lover. "You really have to go," Emily mumbled, ducking away before the humiliation could calcify in her skin. He didn't stop until she reached the employee hallway behind the cafe. Later, as the terminal emptied and silence replaced the shuffle of passengers, Emily sat in the break room alone, the incident playing on loop in her mind. He'd never forget the feel of that hug, not because it was warm but because it was entirely wrong. She hadn't realized how desperately she needed to feel safe, just for a second. The mistake hadn't just been stupid. He had been honest, and honesty, she was learning, was the next morning. She clocked in at 6:57 a.m., apron already stained with dried espresso from the pre-open shift. She kept her head down, took orders, cleaned tables. She pretended that nothing had happened. Until it did. At exactly 8:01 a.m. the cafe bell jingled. Oh, she didn't look up. Not until her manager nudged her shoulder. "Hey, someone's asking for you." Emily turned. And they were Brian Carter. The same gray eyes. The same unreadable face. Except now he wore a charcoal coat and the faintest ghost of a smile. "We'll take a black coffee," he said. Emily nodded, her voice stuck somewhere between her throat and her pride. "It would go sugar," he added, "and if possible, made by you." That's when she knew. It was sequenzo, chapter coffee, croissants, and consequences. The cafe was quieter than usual. That early lull between red-eye arrivals and morning commuters. The espresso machine hissed like a dragon waking up. Outside the frosted glass windows, the world moved quickly. But inside, time slowed. Emily Lane stood behind the counter, pouring coffee with the precision of someone trying not to feel. She had almost managed to forget the moment from yesterday. The hug, the wrong man, the shame. Almost. Until he walked in again. Brian Carter didn't move like a man used to waiting. He moved like he owned the air. People stepped aside instinctively. Conversations dimmed. Eyes followed him like shadows. And this time, he didn't go to the register. He went straight to her. "You again," Emily said before she could stop herself. Brian's eyes crinkled slightly. "Good morning to you too." He held his gaze. "I thought billionaires had coffee delivered to their jets or grown in secret forests by monks. I'd do that on weekends." His tone was dry, almost amused. "Today I'm here." He placed a $100 0-cent bill on the counter. "For coffee?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "For your time?" Emily folded her arms. "You want me to serve you? Personally?" "Unless that's against the rules." He glanced at her name tag, then back to her eyes. Emily. The way he said her name made something inside her chest twitch. She hated that. He grabbed a fresh cup and turned toward the espresso machine, shoulders tight. "Black, no sugar, right?" "Yes, and a croissant, but only if you make it." "I don't bake them. I just warm them up." "I warm it like only you can." He turned and stared at him. "You do know how weird this is, right?" He gave the faintest shrug. A woman hugs a stranger at the airport and vanishes. The next morning he shows up to see if it was a mistake or a beginning. Emily blinked. "You think this is the beginning of something?" "I think it's the first time in a long while someone touched me without knowing who I am." That silenced her, not because it was poetic, but because it was true, and she hadn't expected truth from a man like him. As she warmed the croissants and prepared the coffee, Emily kept glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking a watch. He was just watching her. Quietly, intently. When she brought the tray to his table, one near the window, far from the others, she set it down and crossed her arms. "You know this isn't normal, right? You showing up here, asking for me." Brian looked up at her with those storm-colored eyes. "I'm not normal. The part I figured. I want to know why you hugged, but..." "I told you," she said, trying not to fidget. "I thought you were my brother." "But you're not sure anymore, are you?" Emily stared at him. "What's your deal?" He leaned back slightly, folding his hands over the table. "You want the PR answer or the real one?" "I work a 10-hour shift in wet shoes. I'll take..." "I'm tired," he said simply. "Of being looked at and never seen. Of being followed but never met. Everyone wants something you didn't. I want..." But you hugged me like someone who wanted to feel safe." That struck deeper than she expected. She shifted her weight. "Are you always this blunt with people who spill espresso on your aura?" He smiled faintly. "Only the ones I can't forget." Silence settled between them. Emily looked away first. After a beat, Brian lifted his cup and took a sip. Then he gestured toward the croissant. She watched him. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then nodded. "I literally microwave that. Still. Best croissant I've had in months. You need better standards." "I have them," he said, "which is why I'm sitting here." Emily didn't know what to say to that. So she walked away. But she didn't walk far. She stood behind the counter, pretending to clean but really just listening, watching. And he stayed. For 20 full minutes. He drank his coffee, ate his croissant, and never looked at his phone once. When he stood to leave, he placed his empty cup gently on the tray and glanced toward her again. "He'll be back tomorrow," he said. Emily frowned. "Why?" "Because I want to see if you'll be here." That night, as she walked home to their small apartment and unlocked the door to find Oliver asleep with his math book on his chest, she let herself lean against the doorframe and something had shifted. He didn't know what it was yet, but she felt it. And so did he. Chapter 3. A Billionaire's Smile. The next morning arrived with the pale blush of dawn spilling over the tarmac. Emily Lane moved through the cafe like muscle memory. Same apron, same shift. Same noise of grinders and morning groans. But something was different. She had braided her hair. Not that she was trying to impress anyone, she told herself. Just practical. And she'd added a dab of lip balm. The tinted kind. Not that it meant anything. "Emily," her manager called from the register. "That guy's here again." He didn't have to ask who. He already felt him. Brian Carter stood at the same table near the window. Same sharp coat. Same unbothered stillness. But this morning he wasn't alone in his stillness. This morning Emily noticed something else. He was not the kind of smile you wear for business meetings or investor photo ops. It was smaller, quieter, like someone smiling at the memory of warmth in a cold room. He approached with a tray, black coffee, one croissant, before he could ask. "It didn't peg you for a creature of habit," she said as she set it down. He looked up at her. "Only with the things I enjoy." Emily tried not to react. "Is that so?" He took a sip of his coffee, holding her gaze. "How's your brother?" That stopped her. He hadn't told him. Her chest tightened. "How do you know about Oliver?" "You said his name. Once. Under your breath when you were muttering about needing your shift cut short." He looked away. "He's fine," she said quickly. "Just asthma. And growing pains. You know teenagers." Brian tilted his head. "Oh, I don't, actually." Emily paused. Sorry, you probably skipped childhood and just went straight to Billionaire." That made him chuckle. A real one this time. Soft, unguarded, he ran a hand through his hair. "Not exactly, my childhood was... It was," he said simply. It caught her off guard. Most men she'd met carried pride like a shield. But Brian, he handed you a piece of his truth like a gift wrapped in silence. Emily sat down. "Just for a second. You don't seem like the type to come back to the same cafe twice, let alone 3 days in a row." What? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, watching a plane land through the glass. The early morning light framed his face in gold. "Because you didn't ask anything from me," he said finally. "Not money, not favors, not recognition. I know who you were. It's the part I like the most." Emily hesitated, her voice softer now. "Do you always chase down the people who see you wrong? When they see me human?" The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt like a breath, like the kind of quiet that lets pain rise to the surface without drowning in it. Brian leaned forward slightly. "What do you want, Emily?" He blinked. "Excuse me? In life, what are you chasing?" He almost laughed. Honestly, rent money and decent health insurance. Not again. Emily looked at him, really looked, and when she answered, her voice was low and honest. I want to not be afraid every day, not just about bills or Oliver's health, but about being invisible, about giving my best and still coming up short. I want... He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back and said, "That's the most beautiful answer I've ever heard." Her heart did something strange then. It fluttered. And not because of who he was, but because of how he listened. As she stood to return to the counter, Brian pulled a small notepad from his coat pocket and scribbled something down. He arched an eyebrow. Another billion-dollar deal? It was something more valuable. He handed her the note. It read, "Tomorrow, same time. Don't be late. This is the only part of my day that feels real." Emily held the note for a second too long. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the paper into her apron pocket. That night in her cramped apartment, she found herself staring at the note long after Oliver had fallen asleep beside her. The streetlight outside cast a soft glow over her bed, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. A real one. Chapter 4. My Brother, My Burden. The apartment smelled faintly of overboiled rice and lemon cleaning spray. A heater clicked in the corner like it was coughing through old lungs, barely warming the single-bedroom space. Outside, the wind scraped against the window like it wanted in. Inside, Emily Lane stirred soup with one hand and pressed her phone to her ear with the other. "Please, just give me a little more time. I know the bill's overdue, but I'm working 2 jobs. I can pay something next week." Her voice was low, careful, like she didn't want to wake the storm that always seemed to be waiting just beneath the surface of her life. "No, I can't put anything on a card," she said, then paused. "Because I don't have one." A long silence, then a soft thank you, before the line disconnected. She exhaled slowly, head leaning against the kitchen cabinet. Behind her, Oliver coughed. She turned quickly, grabbing a bowl and walking it to the sofa where he sat curled beneath a frayed gray blanket. The boy looked far too small for 16. Emily set the bowl on the tray in front of him. "It was my favorite game, the We Owe Everything hotline." Oliver stirred the soup. "You should have told them we already paid, with Monopoly money." She gave him a tired smile and ran her fingers through his hair, softer now from the meds. He looked at her with wide eyes. "Did you promise? Scout's honor." "Emily, you were never a scout." "I know," she said gently, "but you were." Later that night, when Oliver finally fell asleep during an episode of something they'd both seen 3 times, Emily stepped into the hallway and called the free clinic. He waited 20 minutes before someone picked up. "Hi. This is Emily Lane. My brother Oliver Lane was in last week. I think something's wrong. He's in more pain. He's not sleeping. He says it's fine, but..." The nurse on the other end was kind, but honest. They needed tests. Tests she couldn't afford. Without insurance, without help, without... Lane, the nurse said gently, "If the symptoms are worsening, you need to bring him in. Tomorrow." Emily leaned her head against the wall. "How much is the intake again?" Silence. Then, 300, just to start. She closed her eyes. That was everything she had in her account. Everything. The next morning, Emily showed up to the cafe early. Not for Brian. For the extra tips. He kept her apron tight, her face tired but smiling. Brian walked in at 8:01. He had his coffee waiting before he reached the counter. He noticed. "You're early," he said. "I could say the same about you." He studied her. "You didn't sleep." "Not much." He glanced around. The place was quiet. A few business travelers, a sleepy couple with suitcases. "Sit with me." "Brian." "Just for 5 minutes." Emily hesitated. Then she nodded. They sat in the corner booth, the one that caught the morning light just enough to feel hopeful. He took a sip of coffee. She didn't touch hers. "Tell me what's wrong," he said softly. He looked out the window. I can't. Because if I start, I might not stop. His voice didn't change. Try. She inhaled sharply. My brother is sick. We don't know how sick, but it's serious. His kidneys. The doctors think he needs more tests, maybe even treatment. But we don't have insurance. We don't even have rent money. And he's just a kid, Brian, just a kid. The words fell out like stones dropped from her chest. Brian sat still, listening. When she stopped, he said nothing. And then he did the one thing she didn't expect. He reached into his coat, pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. I can help. Emily stared at the card like it was a loaded weapon. I don't want your money, she said quickly. That's not why I told you. I know, that's why I'm offering. I'm not some charity case. He leaned forward. Then let me make you a deal. He narrowed her eyes. What kind of deal? You come to my apartment. You cook for me. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, 7 days. I'll pay you. Enough to cover your brother's tests. More than enough. Emily blinked. You want me to be your... I want you in my space. Just for a week. No obligations after that. I won't make this offer again. He stared at the card. And for a moment she saw it. Not the billionaire. Not the stranger. Just the man. He was offering her something he didn't give lightly. Try a way out. And for once her pride wasn't louder than her love. That night she tucked Oliver in and stared at the ceiling for a long time. At 2:13, Aziam, she whispered to the dark. I said yes. Chapter 5. The Deal. Emily Lane had never been in a building like this before. The elevator alone was smoother than her entire life. Velvet walls, brushed steel buttons, and silence that pressed against her ears. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world made of glass, stone, and stillness. Brian Carter's penthouse wasn't cold. It was controlled. A 2-story skyline view, windows like theater screens, everything in charcoal, slate, and gold. No clutter, no warmth, just curated perfection. He stood by the marble kitchen island, the sleeves rolled up, reading something on his tablet. You're early, he said without looking up. Emily adjusted her tote bag, which felt embarrassingly out of place against the sleek modernity around her. You said breakfast. I didn't want to be late. He set the tablet down, eyes finally meeting hers. You're not late. You're exact. He raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? He smiled. It's a start. Emily unpacked slowly. A grocery bag with basic ingredients, eggs, rosemary, coffee beans from a shop she trusted. Things she could cook blindfolded. Brian watched her from the kitchen bar stool, coffee already in hand. Not interfering, not speaking, just observing. Always stare at people while they work, she asked, cracking an egg into the pan. Only what I don't understand them. He stirred the eggs, flipping rosemary into the butter. What's so confusing about me? He said no to free money. I said no to being bought. He nodded thoughtfully, tapping the countertop with one finger. That's rare. Emily turned to face him. So is your offer. Brian's voice softened. I didn't offer because I pity you, Emily. Why? He held her gaze. Because I've been surrounded by everything except sincerity. And for some reason, when you talk, I stop pretending. He said. That silenced her. She turned back to the They ate in the glass room overlooking the city. The sun was just rising, casting gold over the skyline. He took a bite, paused. You made this with 5 ingredients? 6, she said. You forgot the tiredness. He laughed. A real one. What's in your tiredness, salt or sugar? It depends on the day. After breakfast, he cleared the plates without asking. He watched him, the billionaire CEO, rinsing dishes like he'd done it 1,000 times. No cameras, no audience. Just 2 people in a kitchen pretending the world wasn't waiting outside. When he returned, his expression had shifted, more serious. I want to set a few things straight, he said. Emily nodded, leaning on the counter. I'm listening. He began. This arrangement is professional. No obligations, no expectations. Yup. 2. You'll be paid at the end of each day, not week. I won't have you worrying about money while you work. Her throat tightened slightly. And 3, his voice slowed. You're allowed to say no to anything. Emily looked up. Most people don't tell me no, he said, and it shows. He nodded. I've noticed. He handed her an envelope, plain thick, inside cash, more than enough to cover Oliver's first round of testing. He froze. Brian, miss it? He raised a hand. Payment for today, nothing more. She swallowed, folding the envelope and sliding it into her bag with care, like it might disappear if she wasn't gentle. Thank you, she whispered. You earned it, he said simply. Before she left, she turned at the elevator. Why me? Brian leaned against the doorway for a moment. You hugged me, he said finally, and didn't ask for anything after. Emily stared at him, heart in her throat. And then, for the first time since she met him, she smiled softly. I guess we both made a mistake. He returned the smile. Maybe, but some mistakes change everything. Chapter 6. Cooking with strangers. Day 1 had been quiet. Day 2 was different. Brian Carter stepped into the kitchen that morning not as a billionaire in command, but as a man with a coffee mug in his hands and hesitation in his eyes. Emily Lane stood at the stove, humming softly under her breath. The same apron, the same tired ponytail, but something about her presence warmed the sterile space. It wasn't the food. It was the noise. The scent of browned butter and cinnamon filled the room, along with her soft laughter as she scolded the toaster like it was a stubborn child. Brian stood a few feet away, watching. Do you always talk to appliances? He asked. She didn't turn, only the ones with attitude. He smiled and leaned against the counter. And what does that say about me? She finally glanced back. You haven't burnt my bread yet, we're good. By day 3 he started lingering longer. First it was just sipping coffee near the island while she chopped herbs. Then it was asking questions. Small ones. You cook? She shrugged, whisking a sauce. My mom cooked every night, even when she worked doubles. I learned early on that a good meal could make someone feel safe, even if just for 20 minutes. Brian was quiet. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, she added, but in the kitchen I feel like I do. He nodded. I think I understand. Do you cook? I boil water, he said dryly. Fancy. He cracked a smile. Very, my microwave skills are award-winning. On day 4 he set his phone down when she walked in. On day 5 she caught him slicing vegetables. Badly. You're going to maim yourself, she warned. Isn't that part of the thrill? Not to let you enjoy tetanus. He stood beside him, adjusted his grip, and without meaning to, their hands touched. Just for a moment. He looked down, she didn't move. Something shifted. A beat passed before she stepped back and cleared her throat. Try again, just don't bleed in my soup. By day 6, Emily was humming again, this time louder. Brian had grown used to her voice in the mornings, the clatter of her bag hitting the counter, the way she read his face instead of his reputation. She didn't flinch when he was quiet. He didn't fill the air to impress him. He simply existed. And that somehow made him want to exist too. He found himself asking about Oliver, about her favorite music, about the worst date she'd ever been on. He said it involved a man who called her kiddo and ordered for her without asking. And for the first time in a long time, Brian laughed. Not politely, not because he was supposed to, but because he meant it. On the morning of day 7, he walked into the kitchen before she arrived. He'd already brewed the coffee and laid out the ingredients. When she entered Sam's tired bag, Sam's exhausted face, she paused at the counter. You did that? He shrugged. I wanted to try. Emily walked over and picked up an egg. You're lucky you didn't poison yourself. I had a good teacher. He had a woman who scares me when holding a frying pan. He smirked. That's fair. They ate in silence that morning. Not cold silence, but one filled with mutual knowing. When he looked down, startled. "I have a gala tomorrow night," he said. "I'm supposed to bring someone." Emily stared at him. "Let me guess, you want me to cater?" "No," he said, voice low. "I want you to come with me." She blinked. "I can't, Brian, that's not my world." "I know," he said. "That's why I want you there." She hesitated, her heart pounded. "I don't have anything to wear." "Already took care of that." He stared at him. "You planned this." He hoped. Emily didn't skip. She picked up her bag and walked toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, she looked at him and said softly, "Nighten up it." Brian nodded, his voice just above a whisper. Chapter 7, Gala Night. The dress fit like a memory Emily wasn't sure she was allowed to have. Midnight blue, off-shoulder, simple but elegant, the kind of fabric that whispered rather than shouted. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Brian's penthouse, unsure who was staring back. Her reflection blinked. Same brother waiting at home with a heating pad and a glass of warm milk she left beside his bed. But tonight, for a few hours, she didn't feel like just a girl behind a cafe counter. She felt chosen. The car ride was quiet. Brian didn't fill the silence with compliments or pleasantries. Instead, he simply sat beside her, sleeves cuffed, hair perfectly styled, but gaze soft. When the car pulled up to the Grand Monarch Hotel, she froze. The doorman bowed. The flash of photographers at the far end caught her off guard. "They don't belong here," she said quietly. Brian looked at her, his voice calm. "You belong anywhere I'm standing." He met his eyes, storm gray, unwavering. Let them stare. The ballroom gleamed like a golden cathedral. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across champagne flutes. Strings played something elegant in the background. Everyone looked like they had stepped off a magazine page. And every eye found them the moment they walked in. Brian didn't flinch. He placed a gentle hand at the small of her back, not possessive, but grounding. The touch said, "You're not alone in this." Emily tried not to shrink. He smiled politely at strangers whose names she'd never heard, but whose perfumes could pay her rent. And then she saw her. Isabella Quinn, Brian's ex. The kind of woman who looked like winter had given her permission to walk the earth. Tall, blonde, polished within an inch of perfection, with a gown that glistened like it had its own PR team. Isabella's eyes narrowed the second she spotted Emily. "Well," she said, gliding over with a drink in one hand and a blade hidden in her smile. "Brian, you've certainly surprised us tonight." He nodded, always glad to keep things interesting. "And this is," Isabella's voice curved around Emily like smoke, "your date? Assistant? Charity case?" Emily opened her mouth, but Brian beat her to it. "She's my guest." There was no hesitation, no flicker. "Your guest," Isabella echoed, as if the word were too fragile to survive the room. Brian stepped closer to Emily, and if anyone has a problem with that. He turned slowly toward Isabella. "We should find another The silence was instant. Isabella's face twitched, just barely. And then she smiled, too wide, too sharp. "Enjoy your evening." He vanished like perfume on cold glass. The night moved in waves after that. Emily stood beside Brian during toasts, during handshakes, during introductions she barely remembered. But he never left her side. Not once. Not when board members sneered behind champagne. Not when investors gave her the once-over. Not when someone whispered the word waitress like it was a disease. He stood still, anchored, loyal, and every time she wanted to bolt, his voice grounded her. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Then let's stay 10 more minutes, just to make them wonder why you're so unforgettable." Later, on the rooftop balcony, the noise behind them muffled by glass and wind, Emily leaned on the rail and breathed, for the first time that night. Her fingers trembled slightly. Brian stood beside her, hands in his pockets. It was she she began. A circus, he finished. He laughed quietly. A very expensive circus. You were perfect. He shook her head. No, I would. Oh. By them, he said. Not by me. She turned to him. His face was serious now. The teasing gone. The guard lowered. You have nothing to prove, Emily. Not to them. Not to me. I know it. Then why do you look like you're ready to run? She swallowed because I'm not used to being protected. Brian was quiet for a beat. Then, in the softest voice she'd heard from him yet, he said, You protect people all the time. You just don't expect anyone to protect you back. The wind picked up. She closed her eyes. He stepped closer. I meant what I said in there, he whispered. He looked up. I know. And just like that, the night, heavy with noise and glass and eyes, softened into something neither of them expected. Not romantic or jet, but something far more dangerous. Chapter 8. The Lie Beneath. 3 days had passed since the gala, but the whispers hadn't stopped. Emily heard them in the cafe. Soft snickers, long stares, pity dressed up as curiosity. Could you see the photos? Got her. With him? It must be some kind of deal. He ignored them. He focused on work, on Oliver's treatments, on pretending like her life wasn't unraveling beneath the surface. But the silence between her and Bria had changed. Not colder. Just quieter. Like something had shifted, and neither of them could name it yet. That morning she arrived late to her shift, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Oliver hadn't slept. The clinic wanted more tests. Her last paycheck was already gone. Mr. Phillips gave her one of his signature looks, disapproving but tired. Try not to bring drama to the counter today. I never bring drama, she said flatly. He arched a brow. You bring him. Emily turned away, tightening her apron, but the ache in her chest lingered. He just wanted one part of her life to feel simple. In the lull before lunch rush, she heard a familiar voice from the other side of the break room curtain. He heard Carter Holdings bought out that restaurant downtown. The words slid through her like ice. What? Me stepped forward. Two baristas froze mid-conversation. Sorry, one mumbled. Didn't know you were. What did you say? It was years ago. That little bistro in the village, it was your family's, right? Carter's real estate division bought the whole block. They shut it down. Emily didn't breathe. He couldn't. He barely remembered how she got to the hospital. Oliver sat beside her in the waiting room, swinging his legs slowly under the chair, headphones in. She held his hand, but her mind was elsewhere. Or worse, he'd get and it could matter. The doctor came and went. Words like treatment timeline and renal stress floated above her head like ghosts. Emily nodded. He smiled. He did everything she was supposed to do. But by the time she got back to the apartment, something inside her had gone still. If she didn't call, she didn't text. He just showed up at Brian's penthouse that evening. He opened the door wearing a soft gray sweater and no tie, the most casual she'd ever seen him. Emily. His voice broke into a smile, but her eyes stopped in him. Old, glassy window. Did you know? Brian frowned. My family's restaurant, she said, voice tight. The one my parents built from nothing. The one we lost when I was 17. He stood. The building was bought by Carter Holdings, she whispered. It was your company. The air between them But he began but stopped. That pause broke her. You knew, she said. Maybe not back then, but now, you knew and you didn't tell me. It was an irony. Then why didn't you say anything? Her voice rose, then cracked. Why did you let me stand in your kitchen and tell stories about it, like it was just some sad little dream? Brian took a step closer. Because I didn't want it to matter. Well, it does, she snapped. It mattered to me. Silence. Finally, he said, I'm sorry, Emily. Her shoulders fell. but her eyes didn't soften. "No, you don't get to be sorry. Not when I needed the truth and you gave me silence instead." We stepped back. "Emily, I can trust you," she whispered. And with that she turned and it didn't fall. Not that night. Not the next day. Not after she deleted his. That weekend the city rained like it was grieving. Emily stood in her apartment, watching Oliver sleep under layers of blankets, his breath uneven but calm. The deed to their family's restaurant was still just a scar in her memory. Now reopened, exposed. She had trusted him. She had started to love him. And he had taken the one thing that mattered, without even. But what hurt most was that he hadn't fought for her. Goodbye, Brian. The rain hadn't stopped it. It drummed against the cafe windows like it was trying to get in, trying to speak for her. Emily Lane didn't have words anymore. Not for Brian. Not for herself. She moved through her shift like a ghost, quiet, careful, too tired to explain her red-rimmed eyes. When customers asked if she was okay, she smiled the way women smile when they've already stopped hoping anyone means it. Brian hadn't shown up. Not once. And that, more than the restaurant, more than the silence, was what broke her. He hadn't come after her. That even she took the train uptown. She had a plan, because she needed to end it in person. To make sure he heard The doorman at Brian's building didn't ask questions. She must have looked like she belonged, soaked through from the rain but standing tall like a woman trying not to cry in a place that didn't deserve her tears. The elevator ride felt endless. When he opened the door, he didn't look surprised. He looked. "Emily," he said, voice like a quiet apology. He stepped inside. She didn't take off her coat, didn't look around. "What do you do?" he asked. Again. Brian stood still, a shadow against the rain-washed skyline. "I didn't know at first," he said. "But when I did, I didn't want to lose you." "You lost me anyway," she whispered. His eyes found hers. "I wanted to fix it. I tried. You can't undo what your company did to my family. You can't erase the nights my mom cried because our name meant nothing anymore, or the day they locked the front door and took everything out. It was a difficult decision." "But you live in it, Brian," she said sharply, "in the comfort that pain bought you." He stepped closer. She blinked. "I've lived in a $1,000 apology for years," he said, "and I thought giving you space would be the right thing. I thought if I stood still you'd come back when you were ready." Emily's voice broke. "I came back to say goodbye." Brian's face didn't change, but something in him cracked. She could feel it. "I loved that restaurant," she whispered. "It wasn't just walls and tables. It was my whole childhood. It was my parents. It was the only place I ever felt like we had enough." Brian nodded once, slowly. "I understand." "No," she said, "you don't. Because when you have everything, you think love can be bought, or repaired, or rewritten." He didn't argue, and maybe that hurt more. He stepped back. "I came here to see if you'd fight for me." Silence. "But you're still standing still." She turned, and this time he let her walk away. Outside, the rain hit her face like needles, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She walked into the subway, swallowed her whole. And when she got home, Oliver was asleep again, curled up in a too-small blanket with the TV still glowing in the corner. He knelt beside him and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm okay," she whispered, "even if I'm not." The next morning she found an envelope under their door. No name, no return address. Inside was a contract. A deed to her parents' restaurant. Signed back into her. No conditions, no strings, no note. Just the keys. A quiet message written between the lines. "I can't undo the past, but I can give it back." Emily sat at the kitchen table for hours, holding the deed in her hands. By the time the sun came up, that evening she stood outside Brian's building again, in dry clothes, with a different kind of storm in her chest. When he opened the door, he didn't speak. Neither did she. We stepped in. And then, without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. A real hug. The kind you don't mistake for someone else. The kind that says, "You're still," and this time it's real. Chapter 10. A hug that meant everything. Emily didn't let go first. Brian held her like he was afraid she might dissolve into mist. Her cheek pressed against his chest, and she listened. For once he wasn't quiet. His breath stuttered, his arms pulled tighter, and when he finally whispered her name it sounded like a prayer said too late, but still believed in. "Thank you," she said. Brian pulled back, just enough to look at her. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said. "That's why it means something." They sat across from each other in the soft hush of his living room. No wine. No guards. No space between them. Just her in a borrowed sweater, and him in that worn gray shirt she'd never seen him wear to anything important. He ran his fingers along the edge of the coffee cup and spoke gently. "I bought the restaurant back the day I found out. I didn't send it earlier because I didn't want you to think it was a trade. It was. I didn't want to be the man who took and then gave as if it canceled out." Emily smiled softly. "You didn't cancel anything, you returned something." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if just realizing she wasn't broken anymore. She was standing in the ash and still choosing to plant something. "I missed you," he said. Emily leaned forward, forehead brushing his. "Then don't stand still next time." Weeks passed like wind over new soil. Emily and Oliver visited the restaurant every afternoon. The space smelled like memory and sawdust. Light poured through the old front windows, now scrubbed clear. She walked through the dust in worn sneakers, tracing her fingers across the counter her father once built by hand. Brian showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He never brought flowers. He brought tools. He sanded old shelves and fixed the broken drawer in the back. He refused to wear gloves, and one day she caught him covered in flour, confused by a mixer. "You're hopeless," she said, laughing. "I'm a work in progress," he said, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. One evening, as the sun set behind the half-finished sign out front, Brian stood beside her, watching Oliver hang up a painted menu board. "I never had a place like this," Brian said quietly. Emily didn't answer. He just reached for his hand. A week later, the hospital called. The treatment had worked. Oliver's numbers were improving. The threat that had loomed so heavily now sat in the back of their minds, not gone, but no longer holding the future hostage. That night, Emily and Brian stood on the hospital rooftop. The air smelled like rain and something warm. She turned to him. "I think I'm ready." "What?" "To stop running." He smiled. "From me?" "What I feel." Brian didn't speak. He just stepped forward and kissed her. The kind of kiss that doesn't spark fireworks, just builds a fire where you can sit and be safe. Wikis turned to monks. The restaurant opened on a quiet Sunday. Locals came. Old faces returned. Emily's mother's recipes filled the air again. Oliver passed out flyers and grinned like his whole body had healed, not just his kidneys. Brian got neither speech. He just sat at the back booth, watching her move through the space like a woman who had come home to herself. That night, after the last guest left, Emily locked the door, turned off the sign, and leaned against the counter. Brian approached, pulling something from his coat pocket. A Escada box. Her breath caught. He didn't make a grand gesture. He just opened it slowly, revealing a ring as quiet and beautiful as the life they were building. "I don't need the answer now," he said. "I just needed you to know. I mean..." Emily looked up, eyes shine. "You're not standing still." And that without a single word more. Tears slid down his cheeks. And she said the only thing that mattered. Yet a hug that became forever. There are moments you can't plan for. Like hugging the wrong man at an airport. Like falling in love with someone you were never supposed to meet. Emily Lane had never expected her life to be rewritten by a single mistake, by a moment so small, so fragile, it could have been forgotten. But instead it became everything. Because the truth is, real love doesn't arrive dressed like a fairy tale. It doesn't wait for the perfect timing or the right outfit, or the clean version of you that the world accepts. It shows up when your heart is tired. It listens when your voice is cracked from pretending you're fine. And sometimes he holds your hand in the quiet. Brian Carter was never the man Emily planned to love, and she was never the woman he thought he needed. But the heart has a way of recognizing what the world did. And when you find someone who sees past the walls, who stays through the silences, the storms, and the truths that are hard to say, you don't let them go. You choose them. Quietly, boldly, again and again. To the woman still waiting for her story to change. The one carrying too much, loving too deeply, and wondering if she'll ever be enough. Please remember, you are not invisible. Not to the one who is meant for you. Love doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it enters like a wrong hug and stays like that. If this story found a place in your heart, tell us in the comments. Have you ever met someone in the wrong moment who turned out to be just right? You're listening. And love, as always, finds its way.